Do you see, you gods of sea and sky? I conquered Troy! Me, Odysseus, a mortal man of flesh and blood and bone and mind! I do not need you now. I can do anything.
Odysseus, why do you defy me?
Who are you?
It is I, Poseidon, god of the wine dark sea. You have already forgotten how I helped you.
Help me. For 10 years you played with us as toys. For 10 years you let blood spill to your shores.
But it was my serpent who silenced Laocoon, or your horse was doomed. Yet you refuse to give thanks. You forget a man is nothing without the gods. You will suffer for this offense. For your arrogance, you will drift on my sea for an eternity. Never again will you reach the shores of Ithaca.
You cannot stop me!
You will suffer.
Happy heresies and welcome to the desert of the real. Hope you enjoyed that clip from the old 1997 The Odyssey TV series with Armand Assante playing Odysseus. This grand myth really covers it all. Yes, the gods can be creeps, but projecting too much morality upon them makes us no better than the village atheist or Christian fundy Twitter girl boss. And let's face it, humans ain't great at passing any morality test. And I wonder if many today could even pass the Turing test. The Odyssey also highlights that hubris is one of our great downfalls. We think we can do it all, that we require no divine assistance, inner dialogue, or sense of gratitude for the numinous. And then, as Paul writes, pride cometh before the fall. Then we wonder why we sink more into matter and madness. As J.K. Chesterton said, a madman is not someone who has lost his reason, but someone who has lost everything but his reason.
A delusion is an idea. That an idea can be contagious. Mean we prefer ideas that fit a pattern. In other words, we don't believe what we see what we believe. And when we are stressed, or our beliefs are challenged, when we feel threatened, the ideas we have can become irrational.
The other great lesson from the Odyssey is why all great conflicts and injustices happen. Sure, an argument can be made that the Trojan War happened because of love, because of the ambitions of rulers, because of the vanity of higher beings. But the truth is that the Trojan Wars occurred because Zeus thought the world was too overpopulated with men. Whether humans threatened him or he believed resources would be scarce is academic. The point is that the supreme being of the cosmos decided to initiate a eugenics and genocide project from his executive office.
Release the Kraken!
You are specks of dust beneath our fingernails. Your very breath is a gift from Olympus. You have insulted powers beyond your comprehension.
And guess what? The project has never ended. The demiurge continues even today, eliminating those that might wake up too much and breeding a race of murderous meat sacks that love 'em some divide and conquer games without frontiers. Nothing has changed, and here we are in these end times of this age of Hermes. Hermes, the one god, along with other trickster wisdom deities, Hecate and Athena, who assisted the awakened and heroic in the Odyssey. And that is you, oh you of the broken places, awake and heroic as you have endured so many Trojan wars for so many lifetimes, always one step ahead from the memos and manipulations of Olympus.
God isn't for you, Lenny. God is for men who have no use for freedom.
You follow the trickster, and you are a trickster yourself. And you know these days are the hardest of them all, but you eat nervous breakdowns for breakfast. It's all fun and games until someone loses a third eye, and then it's just gnosis.
The psychotic drowns, where the mystic swims.
As Hunter S. Thompson said about the current surveillance state and soft porn totalitarian system, in a closed society where everybody's guilty, the only crime is getting caught. In a world of thieves, the only final sin is stupidity.
Well, it's not really a measure of mental health to be well adjusted in a society that's very sick.
So welcome to Aeon Bight. We're running with those searching for the truth and avoiding those who have found it. We're writing our own gospel and living our own myth. We're winning the game of Saturn and fooling the stupid meat sacks that are ruled by Olympus and its eugenics genocide plan.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
And guess what, too? Some have said that the Odyssey is simply the story of the soul or Sophia. Helen of Troy represents the soul or Enoia that has been kidnapped by archons and must be rescued. That's the whole plot. After all, in some Gnostic myths, Sophia reincarnates across history without her memories, including as Ellen of Troy, and finally ends up in a brothel where Simon Magus rescues her. And then both go all metaphysical Bonnie and Clyde against Yaldi and his thug angels.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
And here we are, knowing that being part of Sophia's rescue operation is part of our destiny. We play the trickster, we play the rescuing paladin, and we bring down Olympus once and for all.
You cannot play God, then wash your hands of the things that you've created. Sooner or later, the day comes when you can't hide from the things that you've done anymore.
Both myth and history are sure fiction, as Alan Moore said, rewarding if we take all the advice from the Odyssey. Definitely, one of the greatest realities of both fiction and myth is the importance of altered states of consciousness for that sweet gnosis. So it's a delight to once again host Chris Bennett, the leading authority today on entheogen use of the ancients and moderns. He smokes his way to the virtual Alexandria to discuss his new book, Cannabis, Lost Sacrament of the Ancient World. Get ready to modify everything you thought about the ancients, from the Israelites to the Greeks, about how they contacted higher worlds. Ash smoke on the water, fire of revelation in the sky.
It's better to burn out than to fade away.
Due to tech and weather issues, including a hurricane where Chris resided, we came a little short of an hour and 30 minutes. But I'll provide the entire interview for everyone as a fall special. For subs, I'll include a section of a previous interview with Chris where he discusses the entheogen use in occultism across history, including the drug use of Knights Templar, John Dee, and Freemason groups. Amazing insights, and you won't want to miss this. So please sub for the full psychedelic experience.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
All right, well, that makes you a fucking criticizer, too. So shut the fuck up and smoke my weed.
This information will certainly provide more tools for your essential inner journey. By Odin's dingleberries, you don't go to the underworld just to visit the gift shop, but to find those programmed demons and convert them to winged assistants that will take you to the embrace of Sophia. That is your destiny. That is within you. We bring down Olympus together by tricking the shit out of it and rescuing Helen from the dark tower of conformity and mechanical thinking. Anything else would be average.
Where there is fire, we will carry gasoline.
The more you tighten your grip, target, the more star systems will slip through your fingers.
Let the Karens and Catamites of the establishment destroy each other in their circular firing squads. We are on a special odyssey, which is to find our true selves.
You are tearing me apart, Lisa!
In India, a common technique for training young elephants is to tie a baby elephant to a post with ropes or chains. The baby elephant will initially try to break free, but eventually accepts being tied up and stops trying to escape. When the elephant matures into adulthood, trainers will simply stake that elephant to the ground with the same post and ropes. Despite being strong enough to uproot the post as an adult, the elephant will stay tied to that spot, having associated the post with its power to restrain from babyhood.
Game over, man!
This demonstrates how early conditioning can lead to lifelong beliefs and habits, even when the restraints are only illusion. The elephant, limited by its youthful experience, exemplifies how our upbringing shapes our thinking and behavior as adults, whether those limitations are real or only ingrained perceptions.
What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
Here at Aeon Bide, you are no longer tied by phantom ropes or chains. Your destiny is to roar and be free because Gnosis has shown you that liberty and a masterless journey are the true essence of any human wishing to make the universe a better place. Simple as that. Let us remove any phantom ropes or chains and make Zeus cringe with our interview with Chris Bennett.
You die and then you go up to get judged, right? God pops in the DVD of your life. Like, oh, I don't know about this right here. Mind explaining yourself? This might be the most arrogant thing I say all night, but I actually resent the fact that I'm going to get judged someday. Like, if that's true, that somebody's going to judge me, like, doesn't even make any sense. It's like, dude, you made me, so this is your fuck up, all right? Let's not try to turn this around on me, you know? Jesus Christ. You give me freedom of choice, you make whores, you have me suck at math, and you don't think this thing's going to go off the rails? Like, you set me up to fail, and now you got the balls to now question your own goddamn work. Dude, if I made a car, if I built a car and it didn't run, I wouldn't, like, burn it forever. You evil piece of shit, light it on fire. I wouldn't. I would troubleshoot. Is there gas in the engine? Is the battery charged? Anything beyond this, I got to get a real man to look at it. But I believe in you. I'm going to try and help you out. Yes.
This is the Aeon Bide interview, and as always, it is a pleasure to have Mr. Chris Bennett on the show. Always an amazing adventure of high quality gnosis and revelations on the truth about history and the truth about humanity. This time he will come to discuss his latest book, Cannabis, Lost Sacrament of the Ancient World. Chris, how you doing? And thanks for coming on the show.
I'm doing very well, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure's all ours. And with us too, we got the Moondog Vance. Vance, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm fine, ready to search for truth in all the right places.
Well, needless to say, Chris has definitely been a pioneer. Probably, I would say he's the OG when it comes to the truth about entheogens, historical entheogens. His work is priceless and has really moved the needle to a better world. And I think his books and his research speak for themselves. He doesn't even have to defend himself. It's so awesome. But Chris, last time we had you, we had the group meeting in June 2020. So it was a while, different world, strange world in those times. But maybe tell the audience a little bit about yourself. As you write in this book, Chris, you came to marijuana in a matchbox from a friend in 1996. Is that what started your journey?
Oh, I think you must be reading somebody else's bio there. A matchbox.
Really?
A matchbox in 1990. I've been smoking grass for like 50 years.
Wow. I better go look at. I know it was your book, and I did some copy and pasting. Well, regardless. So so you just got started with marijuana. When did you decide to go become a researcher?
Oh, I started smoking grass when I was quite young, at 12 years old. And I'm 61 now. I guess I always liked it. I quit the odd time, but in 1990, I had a very powerful religious experience that led to me to start researching the role of cannabis in different religions and stuff, right? And so this is what led to my various books.
Awesome. Yeah, and it seems, I wanted to ask you a question. It seems obviously cannabis is now pretty much part of the mainstream. Why it never was? Well, we've talked about it, talk about the demiurgic world. But even here in Illinois now, it's medicinal, it's recreational. I live in the country, and the little town next to me, they're putting in a dispensary, and you got half of the population, the boomers, freaking out. The other half is like money, So it's the same thing, but there's a dispensary in the middle of nowhere in McHenry country and north of Illinois. At the same time, of course, you know me, I feel all drugs should be legal. Adults are adults. We have free choice. We should, when it comes to our bodies and so forth. But I almost feel that the marijuana legalization at this point, it might be doing more damage than good. And I think it should be legal simply because people, I think, don't know how to use it. And you've talked about it. You got so many, the younger generation are using it without approaching it sacramentally, without humility, without understanding what these things are. What's your view on this, and do you agree?
Well, here in Canada, it's completely legal. And I got to say, the normalization here has just been so amazing. You know what I mean? Like every, little old ladies tell you all about CBD, and you go into the legal stores, and it's all walks of lives and cultures and stuff like that. And so much stigma has been removed, right? Unfortunately, there's a certain corporate element that kind of took over from where the grassroots scene was. In regards to I myself, I definitely, cannabis is my sacrament and stuff like that. And that's where what I've tried to bring to the world, more knowledge about is this spiritual role of cannabis. But I don't know that I can condemn recreational use or people that are not spiritual. I've really smoked with people that have, no interest in any of that type of stuff. It's just like kind of a human bond. And I think that's, one of the things about it is it's more about this world. It's like, and it's not just like the act of getting stoned. It's an incredible medicine and the most nutritious food. You know what I mean? Is hemp seed. I had one of the first hemp seed food businesses in 1990, and it was pretty radical then. And now you go into any grocery store and you can get hemp hearts, which is like a superfood, Unfortunately, the fiber hasn't really been realized, very much. It's a little bit of hemp cloth out there and hemp paper, but these things are all really offer a way to regreen the planet, A downside of marijuana, I don't know. It's like, I'm kind of stuck up. I'm a pot snob in the sense that I don't like to be around alcohol at all. I don't like to be around drunk people. I don't go to bars. And I would say I would never have friends over and they get drunk or anything at my house. That never happens. So, I think that it's a positive thing overall, the spread of it. But at the same time, you got legalization in your state. There's other places where people are still going to jail for it and with outrageous sentences. And around the world, I forget about it. Here in Canada, I feel like the war is over. It's like lost a lot of the purpose for the activity. And I think that largely the stigmas against it are religious based. It's like I think the roots of prohibition are Christians versus the devil's weed. And when we take a look through history, this seems to be a scenario that's played out again and again, whether it be the condemnation of these things as devil's sacraments, but when the indigenous cultures were discovered using them, when the Christians came to the New World, so-called New World, or the condemnation of the witches. And I would say this goes right back to the roots of the Roman Catholic Church and the New Testament and the condemnation of Gnostic groups and pagans that also, I think we can really say we're using these substances. You know what I mean? Certainly in regards to the Hebrews, we now know they were through archaeological evidence, which I discuss at length in the new book.
Oh, indeed. And I think at the end of the day, it might be academic, this discussion, because I think it was Aldous Huxley who said an idiot on acid is just an idiot on acid. It's not, you got to get your mind right, whether you're high, whether you're doing this, drinking alcohol, it starts with that. So it's tangential what we're talking about. Yeah. And I remember, you ever watch that documentary Reefer Madness? That's one of my favorite pieces of propaganda to laugh at.
Yeah. Well, like you can use cannabis to play like video games, or you could be like a sadhu in India and partake of Lord Shiva's body and blood, through a chillum of hashish before sitting down to your asanas and trying to achieve oneness of the universe. You know what I mean? It's fuel for both. And I think that a large part of the way it affects you has to do with your intention and beliefs about it. When it was like a major medicine in the 19th century, and it was like huge. You know what I mean? It was in cough medicines and corn and bunny medicine, just such a wide variety of medicines and widespread use. Pisos cure is one of the most common cough medicines of the early 20th century, was cannabis indica based. People didn't really necessarily have like these mind-blowing experiences because they're taking a medicine and they feel the effects and they think, oh, the medicine's working, I'm feeling better. And then ironically, when we rediscovered marijuana medicine after Prohibition, one of the condemnations was it was feel-good medicine. Like somehow, feeling great and being happy was a bad side effect. When you take a look at some of the side effects of pharmaceuticals out there, that's laughable.
Yeah, that Protestant mentality. You just can't have fun. So it is. Yeah. And of course, it's great because I was thinking, God, you had the natives using this medicine to cure things, but in the 19th, 20th century, we were sawing off limbs or taking out uterus every time somebody had an ache or was hurt. So I'm glad this has been integrated into our society because it does complement good health, good science. rational science, so it's part
Well,
of a sort of
it's
holistic.
revolutionized medicine because of the discovery of the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system, which is a natural major part of our vitality in life, was only discovered through the discoveries of cannabinoids and how they work on the human body. And then it was learned that THC mimics, endogenous endocannabinoids, which are cannabinoids produced in the body, and these can be affected by phytocannabinoids. And there's other interesting, connections with cannabis in the human body, like the seeds rich in gamma-linoleic acid, which is found in human mother's milk, and just a couple other rare seed oils. There's estrogens-like molecules in cannabis, and so we have some sort of I think, certainly an agent relationship. According to the latest archaeological evidence, people have been utilizing cannabis for rope and fiber for close to 30,000 years. And we know the evidence of its ritual use goes back to 5,000-6,000 years ago. Like recently in Spain, they found a 5,000-year-old plate in this. It was a temple that was run by women, all in high role places. They figure either religious leaders or royalty. And they found a huge plate with both cannabis and wine residues that was 5,000 years old. Similarly in Ukraine and Romania, there's evidence that cannabis was used in burial rituals going back that long as well, which is older than any written religion or anything like that. And I think the real revelation in regards to cannabis and other entheogens in this, what's emerging from the ancient world, is that, this is the foundation of a lot of how this stuff started, basically in shamanism and the use of psychoactive plants, maybe also ritual fasting and trance states induced by singing and dancing and that sort of stuff as well. But, the undeniable reality is in the biblical tradition that cannabis played a very significant role in the Old Testament period, certainly. And I think that can lead to some pretty founded speculation into the New Testament period.
Oh, I would agree. We certainly want to unpack that because your book has so much excellent research. But you also talk about in your book, Chris, you talk about the Great Leap Forward, which started 65,000 to 50,000 years ago, suggests cannabis may have enabled our prehistoric ancestors with novel new thought processes that aided in the development of tool making and other skills. So now we're in Terence McKenna Stone Age territory.
Yeah. Well, this was actually based on I'm excerpting a paper by Dr. Jeffrey Guy, who was the head of GW Pharmaceuticals, one of the leading medical cannabis pharmaceutical companies, and Dr. John McPartland, a well-known cannabis researcher. And they're speculating, I'm sure inspired by McKenna, who also wrote about cannabis as well, was a heavy cannabis user. McKenna, he suggested there may have been some connection between cannabis and storytelling because of the way we weave a tale and tie everything together. There's all these kind of linguistic connections there that he felt. And I think McKenna's, and not something, this isn't something that Dr. Jeffrey Guy and John McPartland go into, but McKenna certainly did. I think what his greatest contribution to the field of entheogenic studies was bringing in Julian Jaynes' The Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. And I think that's, significant here as well when we take a look at cannabis and how it was used in ancient Judaism and Assyria and Zoroastrianism and these different religions. Because it really ties it in. Not necessarily that James is 100% right, but I think he's got some pretty interesting contributions when it comes to the origins of thought. He didn't mention psychoactive substances himself. McKenna threw that in there, but basically for those people that don't know about Julian Jaynes, I'm sure most of your listeners do, he suggested that early man didn't think as we did now. They were more animal-like, just living, trying to survive through the day. And that the initially hearing voices in your head, thinking, occurred for most people, much like it does for a schizophrenic, as something outside of themselves, maybe the voice of their father or their chief or something like that. And this developed into the idea of some sort of God and heavenly messages.
Yeah, exactly. We had voices in our head, and so I guess psychoactive probably helped us manage this, attune it, optimize it.
There's receptor sites in the areas of higher thinking and memory, so it's right in there, and even today many novice users report paranoia, delusional thoughts, and that type of stuff. And I suspect that cannabis can exasperate some people with schizophrenia, not necessarily helping. Probably CBD or THC affected might be beneficial in some strains, and other strains detrimental in these cases. I'm not a scientist, but I'm pretending to be one right now on the show.
You play one on TV.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, and I think this is one of the real reasons it was used in religious ritual, And I think there's an interesting connection, and James goes into this as well. Like most ancient religious texts, that is, Avesta, these sorts of things, a lot of the biblical stuff, were written in verse and come out like that. And I think that this is interesting when we take a look at the role of cannabis in music. And cannabis has inspired a number of different genres, rock and roll, reggae, Greek rimbagiata, jazz, a variety of things, and also hip hop, where I think, the hip hop culture is really connected. Many of these well-known hip hop artists celebrate cannabis culture. And I think there's a connection here with what was taking place in the ancient world in cannabis. Originally, the drum and the lyre, these were shamanic tools used in ritual invocation, you know what I mean? And James talks about how repetitive music throws the brain into a right trance and a repetitive pattern. And out of that, stuff comes out for a hip hop artist. It's the verses that they're spitting out, their rhymes. A lot of it's just on live and freestyle. And I suspect that was a similar situation in regards to some of these temple settings where we know cannabis was used, where drums and beating, and then eventually, ba-dum, 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 all of a sudden the holy word starts spewing forth, again, cannabis is known to affect the areas of the mind involved with music and poetry.
No, it makes perfect sense. Your book covers it, and it was always cracks me up. You talk to Christians, or Christians never notice that in the Hebrew Bible, many places, for example, David just goes on an altered state, gets completely naked, and he's just dancing in front of the altar of the Lord, the ark, and it was completely Dionysian and shamanistic, and a rave. It's like he could be at a rave somewhere in the field and he would be right at home, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's a real shocker for people. It's hard to get their head around. Most people that have read the Bible don't really know much about its creation or understanding. I'm like, the idea that the Hebrew God Yahweh was married and had a wife, is mostly unknown, I would say, probably in the Christian West amongst churchgoers and stuff like that. But this is widely accepted amongst historians and biblical scholars now. And there's no denying it. You know what I mean? Yet it's just so foreign to these people, the idea that this could have taken place, and I'd like to see more knowledge about the origins of the Bible take place. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. There's no doubt, even in scholars like James McGrath and Margaret Barker have said that even the Gnostics, when you're or the Mandeans, when you're looking at Sophia and the Archons and all that, it's all coded for all the angels and Asherah of when Israel was more of an animistic, shamanistic sort of religion that got suppressed. So it's all there. And also, too, which is very important, and you bring in your book and other scholars have noticed, but the ancient Hebrews were probably basically a cult of Dionysus, right? It was an altered state.
There was like some overlaps there, for sure, that came up. There's been coins minted that indicate, that they kind of combine Yahweh and Dionysius and stuff. So there were certainly some overlaps there. I don't know about the deeper origins of Yahweh. I don't think so. I think it's just Yahweh is so synchronistic that he just adapts everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that's the power of his success. Going into arriving in ancient the Levant and adopting all the aspects of El, the king god, and adopting all the aspects of Baal, the storm god, and even taking their wives and stuff like that, until he adopts all her aspects as well into his big globby parasitic identity, at least according to the Gnostics.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, that's what the Hebrew Bible is. And yeah, suddenly the Jews goes into captivity in Babylon, and he comes out more like Marduk, and he's more about laws and order. And you're like, that's kind of a different God. And oh my God, Satan's the bad guy now. What happened? So
yeah. Well, this is where I think a lot of the cannabis and stuff falls by the wayside, is in this transition. And initially, I think it was a big part of the cult of Asherah, and scholars have suggested this as well. It's interesting because, I've been on the show years before, and I've talked about these Hebrew references to Cannabosum that were Canna and Cannabosum that were suggested by Sula Bennett, a Jewish etymologist and anthropologist, who suggested there were these references to cannabis in the Hebrew Bible under these terms that were mistranslated as calamus. And both those references, when you follow them in context, and this new archaeological evidence out of Tel Arad in Jerusalem, where they found a Jewish temple site, and which had two altars, one that frankincense was burnt on, and the other which cannabis resins were burnt on. The archaeologists involved believe it was like a form of hashish. Is also connected with the cult of Asherah, and so I think it's really fascinating because one of the reasons this temple site is so well preserved was because it was canceled. It was like buried in a day at the time of, they believe, Hezekiah, or maybe his grandson Josiah, who were, I don't want to say monotheistic reformers, because I don't think there was any monotheism prior to then. I think that, you have to talk about things like centralizing worship in the Jewish temple into one cult, and it's something new. It's not a return to something. This is a new thing. And the Bible is written by the people that, laid out by the people that were on this team.
Right.
So it makes it seem like that it was always that way, and these other things were adulterate. But the archaeological evidence is pretty clear throughout the Levant that it was polytheistic, and Asherah was coupled with Yahweh. There's multiple inscriptions and engravings and things like that refer to Yahweh and his Asherah and show him in combination, just like this was all over the ancient world with other deities as well, Ishtar and Tammuz, etc., was like the common kind of way of worship. And so the idea that it was something old is just not laid out in the dirt. You know what I mean? It's just something that comes to us through the Bible. And I think it's also a time, that they move away from more shamanic type of revelation into what, like you pointed out, coming back with laws and edicts, like with Marduk, and it's a means of ruling the kingdom, you know what I mean, and ruling the people. It's like trying to bring a polytheistic kingdom into agreement must have been a real struggle, because there's all these conflicting deities with their own cults and their own wants and needs. And so everybody's vying for the trying to be the head of it all and trying to be the ones in control, and that's switching up here and there. At the time all this took place, the Jews were being attacked by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and this is when it all kind of fell apart for them. And so there was a real need to consolidate the kingdom in a lot of ways due to political factors. And so being no separation between religion and the state, this, I think, led to monotheism. That it's lasted into the modern era and created the world that that we have before us now and its imbalances it is pretty wild. I think, like the loss of something like an entheogen like cannabis and stuff is one thing, but when you think about the suppression of the goddess and the divine feminine into just solely a patriarchal worldview where everything is created by this one male deity, I think it explains a lot about the state of the world we're in. And, the warlike kind of existence, it's really due to a lack of having a good mom.
Hey, Chris, do you think there was a competition between different substances back in the old days? Like, it's pretty clear that the drug of choice of Christianity is wine, right? It's a sacrament.
Dionysus,
right?
Yeah.
And food, of course.
Like Roman Catholicism, for sure. I don't know that you could say that about, the Gnostic texts. It's like you take a look at the book of Iu. It's like there's a variety of substances in use in that. Incense that contained a wonder, and vine branches put in wine, all sorts of wild stuff in that. But yeah, I don't know. I one time brought Dr. Michael Aldrich over for a lecture, and he gave a great presentation on alcohol cultures versus cannabis cultures in the ancient world. And he certainly thought that there was some sort of a big feud. I think a lot of wine and stuff like that was often infused in the ancient world. It's a pretty common. I mentioned that earlier about that 5,000 year old plate that had both wine and cannabis residues on it. And they found, in Scythian tombs, they found golden goblets that contained both residues of cannabis and opium in it mixed with wine. The Zoroastrian texts refer to bang infused wines as well, so it wasn't an uncommon feature. And strong drink in the Bible as well was probably a mixture of a variety of substances. But
think of Marcus the magician, the Valentinian.
Yeah, Marcus the magician.
He would throw spices in his wine, and it's documented. Everyone would just get high immediately, or right after that.
Yeah. So there's certainly indications of that. I think in the cult of Dionysius as well. It's probably, and I'm not just talking just cannabis. I'm saying like henbane, mandrake, probably a variety of different substances. But I do, it certainly became that way, I think. You know what I mean? When you take a look at the Christian world and the Christian West, certainly wine and other alcoholic drinks have been okay, whereas other substances have not been okay. And there's always been prejudice against them. I think even when you read accounts of when people, after the Crusades started going into India and the Middle East and these places, when they came across it, it was kind of looked down upon, the use of cannabis or opium and these types of things. So I think there is some element of that. I don't know how much of it is purely religious based. I don't think that. I think the Roman Catholic Church certainly made a distinction.
Well, I have this theory that each substance, a mind-altering substance, has its own god built into it. Like you talk about the green man, with cannabis, and so and other things. And it might be that these gods were fighting with each other, in the ancient days, and all these little groups that had a particular god and with its particular drug. I think the same thing about music, actually. I think every kind of music has its own drug in the back of it. Like you mentioned, hip hop, and of course, certainly the jazz artists of the early 20th century loved their smoke. But you got to wonder if there's not some sort of chicken and egg thing going on here with the who's influencing who. Is it the group with the substance, or is the substance taking the group?
Yeah, interesting. I guess I don't know that I believe in like discarnate entities and all these things. I think they're more like human projections to me, rather than entities that have their own divine existence. I like the Gnostic concept of anthropos. a lot, and I think that's where Carl Jung kind of came up with the idea of the collective unconscious, was from that and alchemical material, anthropos is like the spirit of humanity, or Adam Kadmon in the Kabbalah, and I think, I think that's I guess it's got its kind of own independent and interactive kind of aspect to it, when I look at things like I think my initial religious experience with cannabis had to do with reading the book of Revelation, and reading the Tree of Life verses, and that's what led me on this path. But at the same time, like, I can kind of see like the revelation of the world we live in today. I totally accept that it was written in 95 AD, about that time period. Babylon was Rome, and the beast was a Roman emperor and stuff like that. But I think it's kind of bled into like the collective unconscious, and so then, anthropos is kind of interacting out with it. Maybe anthropos even conceives of itself as God in its own way or something like that. But I think that's kind of where I'm at, that these are archetypes and things like that in the collective consciousness, but not freely independent beings and stuff, is my own take on it.
Yeah, fair enough.
And you can also talk about egregores. Jung said we can project our or energy out, and it certainly defies reality at some point. So it wasn't controversial in the old days. I mean, atheists like Sigmund Freud believed in telepathy. They thought, animals have telepathy. They can detect earthquakes and storms hours before they strike. So yeah, I mean, it's more, we're very connected.
Yeah, you look at herds or schools of fish or flocks of birds, crowd hysteria, it's
the
like
monarch butterfly. It's just
so it's an element, and I think when I look at my own religious experience, I think it's tied in with that there's an aspect of us that's continual. It's like what Jung said, the collective unconscious was the instinctual force in animals, and became more complicated with us and started adopting our symbolic universe and incorporating into it. And I think it was like a recognition of something that is what I had, rather than, some sort of future prediction or something like that. I think that also it's interesting, like how the whole Garden of Eden mythology, plays in with drugs, you know what I mean? And Adam and Eve, and they eat the fruit and their eyes become open, they don't die as God said they would. And I see that as tied in with all this stuff with Asherah and Yahweh as well. Numbers of scholars have written about the Garden of Eden in light of what we know of about Yahweh and Asherah, and see it as a reversal of that mythology, and I think that the ancient temple, at least as described in the Old Testament, it had all the elements of the Garden of Eden. There was the serpent that Moses made sat within the temple, and during the reforms of Hezekiah, they took out that brazen serpent and they destroyed it because the people of Israel had been burning incense to it. And the Asherah sat within the temple as well. They had to take that out and destroy it, And the Asherah could have been a sacred tree symbol. The menorah, itself is even like a sacred tree symbol and goes back to Asherah worship. There's inscriptions where there's clearly an ancient menorah style drawing and two goats nibbling on it that are associated with Asherah and her tree of life, and so the idea that the temple, as it's described in the Old Testament, is a reflection of Eden, is accepted on both sides of the academic and the theological. People point out to all these connections to it. There's the cherubim are in there, and it's the flaming cherubim that guard the way to the tree of life and tree of knowledge. So it's kind of symbolic of that. You
got to wonder, who married Yahweh and Asherah? They were married. They get a priest from the Egyptians or something.
Yeah. Well, I think it was I forget the name of the group that they believe brought the Yahweh into Israel. But probably then it's just like the meetings of cultures is where a lot of this type of stuff happens. I think, you know what I mean? People make them together. I don't think they're connecting in some sort of divine heaven or anything.
Yeah, well, maybe it was the bishop from the movie The Princess Bride. Marriage, Peter Cook. Yeah, maybe he did it. And it's interesting too, because yeah, you're talking about the temple, but even before, again, we're going to when the Hebrews were more shamanistic, animistic. They were connected to the spirit world and the divine feminine principle, and they had the tabernacle. And as you show, the whole idea of the tabernacle would have been just one place you went in and you just got really high. I can just imagine like Jeff Spicoli walking out with smoke from the tabernacle, like, oh, dude, that was awesome. So.
Well, this temple in Arad that they found was about, probably about 4 feet by 8 feet. So it was like a tiny little space. So it was, built for keeping the smoke in. This is much like the Scythian tents. The Scythians, they didn't have pipes and bongs back then, so people generally burnt cannabis in a brazier, and you didn't want the smoke to just go off. So there's like tent-like structures. In the case of the Scythians, they had little teepee-like tent structures. But that account in Exodus describes the tent of the meeting, and there's this. This is where the first of these Cannabis references that Sula Bennett said were references to cannabis occurred. Is God commands Moses to make this holy anointing oil with about 6 pounds of cannabis with some myrrh and cinnamon and cassia mixed into about 1.5 gallons of olive oil. And every time he's to speak to the Lord, he covers himself with this oil. And your skin's a big organ. THC is fatty soluble. Some can get through that way. But he also puts it over everything in the tent, and then he burns some on the altar of incense. And he speaks to the Lord in the pillar of smoke over the altar of incense. It's actually the pillar of smoke referred to the Shekinah and represents the physical presence of God in the temple. In the story, Moses is only talking to God when the smoke's pouring out through the tent in the tent of the meeting. You know what I mean? So you throw a psychoactive substance in there with him. That's a pretty radical scenario. Is he talking to God, or is he like a shaman or witch doctor in other cultures having some sort of shamanic experience? Cannabis is actually interacting with the areas of higher thinking and memory, and Moses is pondering on a question for God, looking for an answer, and out of the smoke comes an answer. This is what you shall do. Now I'm not sure I believe in a historical Moses at this point, knowing what we know about the composition of the Bible, and I don't think the Hebrews prior to probably 700 BC knew about a historical Moses either. But at the same time, we have that this is thought to have been written around the time of Hezekiah and Josiah. We have the example of in Assyria. This is a time of Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, who both appear in the Old Testament. And we know that in a similar way that cannabis under the name Kanabu, an Assyrian name for cannabis, was being used in sacred rites there that involved Ishtar. It was offered as incense and a drink to Ishtar and an anointing oil. There's like Assyrian records of large amounts of cannabis being delivered to the temple of Inanna and the temple of Marduk. And this is like historically known, you know what I mean? So a very similar way that it was being used. We know that the Assyrians there's references to cannabis in the Assyrian text that refer to it as opening a topical ointment that opened one's ear to God. And this is a similar way to the way that Moses is depicted in Exodus as using cannabis as well. So this is probably like some sort of widespread kind of Near Eastern, Mid-Eastern technique of ecstasy that was used at a variety of temples, certainly in the Assyrian ones. And now we know from this evidence in Arad, certainly in Hebrew temples, And, I mentioned Asherah and Inanna there, their involvement with cannabis, and they're not the only Near Eastern goddesses that were. We also know Asherah, a Hittite goddess, so it was worshipped by the Hittites. as well. There's references to cannabis in her poems, and talks about the ointment of Asherah is cannabis, which is cannabis. So I think that the indications are that when we take a look at Asherah, Ishtar, Inanna, Asherah, this was like really connected to goddess worship, and goddess worship goes way back. And I think that, likely these goddesses originated with an identical earlier goddess. It's like, I think they splits off into different areas, takes on its own flavor, much like when language splits off, it all starts changing and developing and stuff like that. We see that with a lot of these deities, and that explains their connections and their differences, because they've taken on some local flavor and stuff like that. This was a widespread practice throughout the ancient world. It appears, that it was completely eradicated so well is mind-blowing, but then so was the goddess.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, if you have to control the mystic experience. If you can control that, you can control the people. And like you said, you can have a proper civilization, roads and math and all that good stuff. And even then, what was I going to say? As you write in your book, and I should say too, even people think the Romans were kind of open-minded, but the Romans were pretty strict about magic and other things. They wanted to make sure everything was within the paradigm or the rubric, if you would. But as you write in your book, Chris, the idea of the goddess, as you write, the holy Kadesh, the holy prostitute, Entheogens and fertility and sex are completely tied in ancient times. You can't have one without the other, you might say.
Yeah. Well, cannabis is cross-culturally. It's, lots of references to being an aphrodisiac. I don't think necessarily initiating the feelings of sex, but enhancing them once the arousal takes place. You know what I mean? This is why we see it in tantric rituals. It's been suggested that, like the Hieros Gamos or the sacred marriage, where the priest and priestess or the king and queen reenact the activities of the god and goddess in the heavens to bring fertility to the earth, may have been inspired by the date palm because it has two sexes. We see this also with cannabis, though, where it's two sexes as well. And I think it's equally possible that there may be a connection to that, especially considering the very ancient relationship we see ritually with cannabis. It's funny, every time they make one of these, like there's been a number of archaeological discoveries over the last couple of decades regarding cannabis and sacred sites. And every time they get a new one, they think this is the oldest evidence, the first evidence. And then something older comes along. It was just a few years ago, before the analysis of the altars in Israel, that they found evidence of cannabis in China at a number of sites attributed to the Gushi culture, which was an Indo-European group that lived in China, central China, from about 2000 to 400 BC, when the indigenous Han Chinese chased them out of there. That was thought, that was from like 2,700 years ago. The Hebrew evidence is 2,800 years ago. Both of them thought, this is the oldest evidence ever. But it's clearly a lot older, because these were established practices by the time of this fossilization. It wasn't like people just started using it and then all of a sudden, no, that day. And
we ran out. Oh, dude, we're out of our stash.
Yeah. The use of cannabis by the Indo-European Gushi as well is very interesting because of their connection to other Indo-European groups. And it's been suggested that the term Hayoma, which is the Avestan counterpart of the Vedic Soma, a sacred beverage, is derived actually from a Chinese term for cannabis, huma. Mandy Hassan, a linguist, came up with this theory. And this discoveries in China of these sites by the Gushi, what they found is really well preserved female cannabis flowers in a tomb, about 2 pounds of it in a basket. They found it mixed with capers, I believe it was, in another tomb, getting some sort of food maybe prepared from it. And then they found a bouquet of flowers in another tomb over a mummy. And then after this, they found numbers of braziers that had been filled with rocks and cannabis burnt on it. And this is, and then it was inhaled in tomb and funerary rituals. And this is really interesting because this is the way the Scythians used it as well. Herodotus wrote about their funerary rituals and how they would go into a tent and then throw cannabis on heated stones inside the tent. And then we have this evidence from Proto-Indo-European times, from Romania and the Ukraine, of similar methods of cannabis being burnt in tombs for funerary. So this is a pretty widespread Indo-European practice. And we know that these people, these Indo-Europeans in China, were in contact with the Bactria margina archaeological complex temple culture. Victor Sarianati, a Russian archaeologist, he found 3 temple sites in this region, a large temple site size of a football field type of thing. And large parts of these temple sites were dedicated to the making of a sacred beverage, Sarianati suggests, based on fossilized material and sediments that contained, in some cases, cannabis and opium, and in some cases, cannabis and ephedra and opium, in some places, just cannabis and ephedra. And we know that these gushi in China as well were using ephedra ritually as well, because it's been found in some of their tombs as well. And so the idea is that this name for cannabis, huma, being used in China, which means Scythian hemp or fire hemp, depending on who's translating it, became heoma as it reached this Bactria margina archaeological complex. And then as it spread out from there, became soma through further linguistic changes into the Vedic Indian language. So that's another major, you know what I mean, like major connection. And we know, and interestingly, the people that traded the cannabis back and forth between these regions were the Scythians, and they were known by the name Heoma Varga, the Heoma gatherers. And ancient texts refer to how they both burnt and drank cannabis, and they found the golden goblets there with the cannabis residues in it, as well as other evidence of infused cannabis at other Scythian tombs. So I think that's a pretty, solid case for that. And when you combine that with the evidence of Arad, of it being used at the temple site there, and the temple site, this is really important because they've never found archaeological evidence of the temple site in Jerusalem. This is the oldest evidence of temple worship in Israel. Is this temple site in Tel Arad, Jerusalem, which would have happened just prior to the centralization of worship, which is written about in the Old Testament. And it's thought to be based on the same design, but a miniaturized version of the temple in Jerusalem from descriptions. And they found in the temple at Tel Arad, there was an inscription, a house of Yahweh, which says specifically, as well as figurines associated with the goddess Asherah. And so there was 2 braziers, one with frankincense, one with cannabis. And then I believe there was 2 standing stones originally, but only one remained. And what happened was this was all flipped over in a day. All the stuff, sand put over top of it, and a new floor built. And this is why all this material was so well preserved, right? And Hezekiah is described as going around and destroying all the Asherah temples. Same thing. He didn't do a very good job of it, because when his grandson Josiah came onto the scene, they were all still there. And then Josiah, he claimed to have found that what happened in his kingdom period was they claimed to have found the book of Deuteronomy in the Temple of Solomon. They're doing some reconstruction there, knock a wall down. And
the pride, lucky us.
So it's in a pagan temple. We know that Solomon was accused of burning incense on high to the mother goddess. It's written right in the thing. And some scholars see the Song of Songs attributed to Solomon as a Hebrew version of the Heroes Gamos, or sacred marriage. This is another place where one of these references referred to by Sula Bennett as identifying cannabis can be found, is in Solomon's Song of Songs. So it's and also 3 of the 5 references referred to by Sula Bennett regarding cannabosum have it in connection with frankincense. And particularly, this is notable in the last of these references in Jeremiah 6:20, where he says, "What do I care from your canna from a distant land? Your frankincense does not please me," and he mentions both of them and condemns them, as incense of Sheba, one of the wives of Solomon. And then in Jeremiah 44, we have the verse, where he's condemning the people. He comes across, he's left the Holy Land. It's been taken over by the Assyrians, Babylonians. They're all run out of there. He's over in Egypt, hiding out, comes across Jews in Egypt. And he says, "You're to blame for all the downfall of Jerusalem because you burned incense to the Queen of Heaven and poured out offerings to her." And they say, "Oh, well, we were fruitful when we were doing that. Things were good." It's like, now that it's bad. And it's a pretty interesting scene. But this is all taking place, within years of the cancellation of this temple in Iraq. And so it seems like it's all pretty clearly connected to this time period where the goddess is suppressed, monotheism rises up into this patriarchal religion that we still are. It's pretty much global today,
Yeah, very true. I love. You do deal with Solomon, the Song of Songs, and of course it hides so much. But you also talk about this hymn called "Plow My Vulva," which says, "My vulva is well-watered field. Who will plow it?" And then the answer comes, "Oh, lordly lady, the king will plow it for you, Dumisa." That made me laugh. It's like, they were having fun in those days, weren't they?
Yeah. Sex was a little, similarly with some of the Gnostic sects as well. It seemed like it was a little more of a celebration of orgiastic activity. So I don't know. It's kind of asceticism and fertility aren't really too connected.
Or else you'll die out. Some sects believed in that and still do. So whatever you choose, whatever rocks your boat. But this thing was so interconnected. And what about the idea of the mystery religion Kaikion? That's been debated. Where do you stand with it, Chris?
I'm not, I don't think that it was cannabis from what I, can see. It seems like obviously some sort of psychoactive substance was there. I thought that Tom Hatzish made a pretty good case for opium. I'm less convinced by some of this ergot research, that's been popularized. But definitely, there's I think poppies and stuff appear in imagery associated with Eleusis. So there's obviously some sort of psychoactive substance. But that's kind of where I'm at. The cannabis plays a lesser role, I think, in a lot of the Greek and Roman stuff than it does in the Near Eastern material.
Yeah, and even then, when you look at the New Testament, they're outside of course, the book of Revelation, eating the scroll and this vision of powerful symbolic vision, as we both agree, went really into the collective unconscious and fished out this amazing stuff. Is there anything else in the New Testament that could point to any sort of psychedelic?
If you take a look,
Paul goes to Arabia. Jesus is out in the desert.
Yeah. Well, Paul, has this vision there, white light. It doesn't say he ingested anything, but certainly, when it references to the anointing oil, it says, you've been anointed, so you require a teacher and stuff. And this was one of the main points of contention between the Catholic Church and a lot of Gnostic sects was baptism versus anointing. And Kurt Rudolph wrote about this while drawing no conclusions or ideas about it being a psychoactive substances. But the Gnostic texts themselves, say there's only water in the baptism, and it's there's fire in the anointing oil. And through the anointing oil, we're initiated into unfading bliss, and refer to it as the straightener of crooked limbs and medical applications. So I think there is some something in the anointing oil versus water baptism that led to some sort of split. But I didn't really go too much into the Christian period in this book because with the archaeological evidence, the case for the Jewish use is so strong, and I think really solidifies the identity of canna and cannabis with cannabis, just because there's so many overlaps between the two. That whereas when you start getting into this Christian material, it's just so much to deal with, and it's a little more speculative. I would like to deal with it at some point and readdress it. I had planned to when I'd started the book, but then it just gets so big, and so I just figured I'd cut it off at the Old Testament. And then the topic of Jesus and Christianity has become so complicated now. It's like every time it comes up, you have people arguing, well, did Jesus even exist?
The mythicists come out, yeah.
So it's so hard to talk about.
Some think he was a mushroom.
Yeah,
like Allegro.
Exactly. Yeah, well, on that subject, I think that most of the stuff that you see out of the psychedelic scene on drugs in the Bible is crap. And I kind of not made myself too popular by my peers with writing critical articles of their books, like Brian Marescu's The Immortality Key, or the Psychedelic Gospels by the Browns and Allegro and all these things. And I think there's lots to be picked apart there. It's like we definitely know that substances like cannabis and opium and mandrake were used because they wrote about it. You know what I mean? There's ancient textual references, and largely in a lot of this other type of stuff, it's based on like really loose speculations about imageries and medieval paintings and other things with nothing to back it up. No archaeological evidence, no other textual evidence that's clearly identifies it. So it kind of convolutes things, you know what I mean? It's like, here's this real evidence, and it gets kind of lost by the wayside because there's so much frivolous speculation. Not everything can be true, and I think there's a real lack of critical thinking in the psychedelic culture in regards to a lot of this type of stuff. Well, at the same time, there's a lack of realization and openness, understanding of the context of this amongst academics and historians, because they don't really have the same experience with these psychoactive substances, And I had hoped this material from Tellerrad would, I'm kind of surprised it's still so little known. You know what I mean? It's like really? Nobody's challenging the results of the material, but you're not really getting a lot of academic discussion of it, and it's like solid proof that they were burning cannabis in order to speak to the gods, so yeah,
that's odd. It's almost the same way, Chris, when it comes to astrotheology. I think scholars still think that the ancients sat there with a book or a Kindle, and that's something they don't realize, that the truth is, again, they probably went into an altered state of mind. They did some performative thing because, people needed to be, I'm Jesus or I'm Yahweh. They needed to be entertained. And they always did it under the stars, under some sort of the perfect time. And they could point out, and here you go, here are the stars. Let's remember this as a mnemonic device. So the same way with astronomy, scholars are slowly coming around to that. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
But that's the truth of religion. They weren't just sitting down reading books like we do. And frankincense, I mean, the Magi bringing stuff to Jesus. Frankincense could give you an altered state of mind, right?
Yeah. Well, it's believed like it's got some THC-like molecules in it. Works on some of the same receptors, I believe, and can be used as like an antidepressants and things. There's some studies going on in that regard.
Awesome. Awesome. Vance, do you have a question for Chris?
Oh, let's see. I've been racking them up here, listening to you guys talk. What do you think? What do you think people are actually talking to? When they use entheogens, is it really? You already said that you didn't believe in some sort of disembodied entities or anything. Well, what is it? Are they really all that activity back in the ancient times? What were they just talking to themselves or aspects of themselves?
I do
or
think like this aspect. Yeah, I think there's like a collective consciousness that's kind of aware of itself. In awares coming into awareness of itself. It's like, like a herd of animals or school of fish is under control of something, right? You know what I mean? And I think that there's some sort of force in life itself that is aware, and it's an intelligence, but not the same sort of intelligence as us, and it's sort of becoming aware of itself. So I think that's I've had spiritual experience. I've had really profound experiences of synchronicity that I can't identify under any sort of other banner than something with the ability to act collectively through humanity or something, So I guess it's not that I'm not an atheist, you know what I mean? It's like, I think that things like, as I said, Anthropos or Adam Kadmon or even Shiva could fall into that kind of territory of deity. So I think that in some cases, they are kind of getting into contact with something. Do
you think it likes us, or is it out for itself? I think Yahweh was out for itself.
Yeah, I know. It's like, man, I look at the world. I don't know. It's like it just. It doesn't seem so. Everything. I'm not really feeling a lot of love.
I know what you mean.
Maybe the ending comes out better or something. I really don't know. But
let's hope,
man. I'm out here and I kind of gave up on shit, and I'm out here in Nova Scotia surfing because I just kind of feel like I've been banging my head against the wall trying to change the world, and it's just not happening, man. You know what I mean? Like the climate change and things like that. It's like, it's not like we don't know what's wrong with it. It's not like we don't know the course of action, but trying to implement it is impossible. There's no government that's going to do it, and no government would get elected that would be willing to take those types of steps because down to the individual level of the voter, people aren't willing to give up what we need to give up and make the changes that we need to make. When I take a look at like Christianity and it's like, man, this is what's like bringing Trump into power again here. It just seems also such a mess. I just don't know what to suggest or say there. That I used to have a more positive outlook and hope, and I guess it's just kind of it departed from me.
Chris Bennett became a full-blown Gnostic.
Yeah, you could say this Anthropos has led us to this, right? The collective unconscious. This is where we've gotten.
Anthropos may think it's Yahweh. You know what I mean? It's like that's a possibility. But at the same time, I don't know. It's like I kind of had to back off psychedelics because I felt like I got through a lot of my own baggage, but I was still feeling this like angst or despair. And I kind of feel like it's a global angst or despair. And that's that was one of the things that kind of drove me out to activism was like, okay, well, I've got to go out and change the world if I want to get rid of this feeling. But I just, man, everything just became such a mess. It's like, I used to think of psychedelics as more of a magic bullet. And after through COVID and all the QAnon and all that type of stuff, man, it just so much of the scene became so flaky, and it just doesn't seem like that to me anymore.
Well, again, an idiot on acid is an idiot on acid.
Yeah.
The entheogens will magnify and they'll bring up, but you still have to look in, you still have to do the work, you still have to face your issues, your trauma, the problems of the world, and that no drug is going to do that. It just helps you, right?
Yeah. Could make it easier to take. You know what I mean? It'd be a lot harder
Yeah.
For me to get by without cannabis to ease the pain.
To manage the pain. Yeah, these are, and it's interesting too, because again, statistically, we do live in a time where poverty is less than ever before. There's actually less wars, regardless of what the TV tells you. We deal better with environmental disasters better than ever, regardless of what TV tells you. I mean, the statistics are there, but people are still depression, alcoholism, mental disorders. Those are still on the rise in the West. So it's almost like we need what Jung said, a spiritual solution. We need to go inside the unconscious and find the answers there, like the old days.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know what, I think that entheogens used ritually could play a role, you know what I mean, in the unveiling of that and getting down. I've certainly had experiences where I've got into my programming and, you know, rearranged stuff and then got over that problem under the influence of psychedelics. And I'm sure that techniques could be developed or have been developed that would aid in that sort of thing and their use. But you know, it's like here in this day, you know, I get like ads for magic mushrooms and shit on Facebook. You know what I mean? It's like,
so mushrooms are legal in Canada?
They're not legal. I don't know how that works. You know, it's like, but there's people advertising them and advertising psychedelic retreats and managing to get Facebook ads and stuff like that. But then you could make a post about these things and get your account banned for a week or something. You know, at the same time, which is kind of weird, but. And the corporatization of psychedelics, which is happening exceedingly fast compared to the way that it happened with cannabis, there doesn't seem to be a much regard for the dangers of some of these types of things. You know what I mean? Like people have very powerful experiences on these substances, and not all of them are pretty in light bearing. You know what I mean? These things should be approached with caution, and a lot of times. And not as cure-alls. And I think they are tools of initiation and incredible plant medicines and stuff like that. But there seems to be a commodization of them that leads to them being marketed as cure-alls. And, you know, you're messing with stuff. You're messing with the very foundation of the structure of the mind. And you can really jingle stuff up there. You know what I mean? Like bad things can happen. Look at Charles Manson and that whole scene. You know, it's the dark side of it, but it's there. You know,
everything casts a shadow, as you would say. And what about ayahuasca? I'm a big proponent, and I've utilized ayahuasca. Is that legal in Canada, or what's the government's approach?
There's like you can get exemptions if you're part of a religion that uses it. I haven't heard of anybody ever being, you know, getting arrested for it too much, or ceremonies getting busted. So I think that unless they're getting called into something, that it's something that they just leave alone. But I'm sure if they were getting complaints, my, you know, neighbors holding psychedelic rituals, you know, they have to act on it. But surprisingly little in the ways of legal actions across the board on that.
All right, so it looks like everything is pretty kosher over there in Canada when it comes to these things. So hopefully it's helping, indeed. And because it's interesting. My uncle is the head of the Santo Daime Church, which is a Christian group from Brazil, the Amazons, originating the Amazons, that does psychedelics. And he was arrested in Portugal, not for bringing in ayahuasca, but for bringing in marijuana.
Yeah, so yeah. The marijuana caused a big split in the Santa Daime because
that's it.
Some of them think it's a sacred, you know, the Santa Maria.
Santa Maria.
And the other part of them think it's, oh, that's terrible drug.
It did. And my uncle's on the part where Santa Maria is good. And he says that's because he started talking about the lunar and the solar, and there needs to be balance. And Santa Maria is just the perfect thing. But then you talk to some of the others, and it's like, interesting how religions are, aren't Chris? Always a schism somewhere about something. So awesome. Anything else you want to share about your book, where to find it and all that?
You can find it on Amazon, or any major bookseller will have copies of it, and always interested in people's feedback. If you want to follow me on Facebook or something, you might post stuff from it and other historical material. I'm always keeping an eye on what's happening archaeologically and historically with new cannabis discoveries and other entheogenic studies. And keep on keeping on, and don't let my talks of despair bring you down. Hopefully I get through it. I've just been kind of not feeling that hopeful for the world lately.
It's a time of change, so change is not easy. We're changing no matter whether we like it or not, and these changes in Western culture will continue. And sometimes you just feel, left out, not fast enough, not how we wanted things to be, the flying car or whatever. But so do you have a website?
Don't have a website, no.
You don't, so just look at you on Facebook. I'll have it on the show.
If you Google my name and cannabis, lots of stuff would come up, or a YouTube search my name and cannabis. There's interviews and lectures and that sort of stuff.
Awesome. And Vance, any last question or remark, or shall we say goodbye to you first?
I think it's goodbye. I learned a lot, and now I know that when Moses went up on Mount Sinai, he got stoned.
There you go.
That's why he dropped one of the 15 commandments and only
burning bush.
The burning bush. So awesome. Well, certainly, audience, we just scratched the surface. I highly recommend you get Lost Sacrament of the Ancient World Cannabis, because you will stay in your bookshelf. You'll always have hard, solid data. Chris quotes all these scholars. He reveals archaeological evidence. He's got the maps and the diagram. Everything's there. It's like the book that should settle things pretty much. And a great book. And Chris, always enjoy having you on Aeon Byte. And as always, thanks for everything and good luck.
Yeah, my pleasure as well. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.
Pleasure is all ours.
Take care, Chris.
And there you have it, you shining crazy diamonds. Chris getting us high enough to bypass Olympus and touch the face of Sophia. As mentioned in the intro, due to Archon monkey shines, we came a bit short of the typical hour and 30 minutes. Thus, I'll provide the interview for everyone as a fall special. For subs, though, I'll include a section of a previous interview where Chris discusses the entheogen use beyond the ancients, specifically in occultism across history, including the drug use of Knights Templar, John Dee, and Freemason groups. Don't miss it, and please sub for the full liberating but psychedelic experience. And it supports this Red Pill Cafeteria. I can't do it without you. For subs, let us to more amazing revelations from Chris Bennett. For everyone else, hello and goodbye as always.
All I need are some tasty waves, cool buzz, and I'm fine.
The idea that the Templars may have picked up some sort of